Peaks to Prairie's P2 Center, and we're just helping Diana and Marie with some of the logistics of the workshop. So I wanted to just quickly show you, we have launched a new website, so I wanted to show you where all the materials are for this workshop, because I think it will be really handy for you. I know it's difficult to, it can be challenging to keep track of all the different materials. So this is our homepage. It's just peakstoprairies.org, and if you scroll down on the homepage, you'll get to the EPA Sustainable Solutions Workshop 2015. And if you go to read more, it has the dates for the 2015 workshop, which we're in the midst of right now. And as you scroll down, you'll see all the project materials from each workshop. So March 18th, we have the recording here, which started for some reason at 6 minutes and 28 seconds. But the bulk of the recording is here. And then we've also got all of the homework, assignments, the challenge teams, etc., listed there. If you scroll down a little further, you'll get to the April 15th. So if you missed any parts of that, you can watch the recording here. And under that are the homeworks from the second session. And we'll do the same here after we finish today. We'll make sure all of the materials are up here for today's session. The other thing I wanted to show you was that we left up the final projects of the 2012 Biomimicry Workshop that was completed in the summer of 2012. So we left those up just because we thought you might find those somewhat helpful as you're going through the final stages of this workshop a little bit further down the line. So you'll find those, the team adapters, team communicate, team water, team organize. You'll find those final products there. So I just wanted to let you know that that's where they are, and you can navigate it directly to it at peakstoprairies.org Sustainable Solutions, or again from the home page, and then just scroll down. It's highlighted there. So let me know if you have any questions about that. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Diana. So Diana, I'm going to make you the presenter, or you should get a prompt asking if you're willing to be the presenter.
All right, thank you. Here we go.
And just as a reminder, if all of our attendees could mute your lines, that would be very helpful for background noise. But it sounds pretty good right now, so thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining. I just wanted to take, well, I said actually just a minute ago that Marie isn't joining us today. She had a death in her family, and so she's with her family now, but she will be joining us next month. I wanted to begin with just going over what we intend to cover this morning and with the intent of the class. Go over the May homework. We can talk a little bit about the iSite, and then we'll review the scoping methodology that Marie covered last month in our April webinar. And then I'll go into the next phases in the methodology: creating, discovering, and evaluating. So discovering is really what sets the biomimicry methodology apart from a more general or traditional design process. Then I've got two case studies for you. We'll go over the June homework. I've got an update on the in-person session with some pictures of where we're headed. And then we should have some time for question and answers at the end. All right. Okay. So for some reason, oh, there we go. So if we can, so the purpose of the homework this month, for the May homework, was to get some practice identifying function, and I just pulled a few from the worksheet. Thanks so much for turning in the homework. Some of you, it looks like, worked as teams, and some of you may have done this individually. But this is a really key, important task and skill to develop and to really hone as you become practicing biomimics. Would anyone like to share some of their responses or their reaction to going through this process of identifying function?
Sure. This is Elliot. Can you hear me?
Sure. Thanks, Elliot.
Yeah, I thought number 4 was really interesting, which is number 3 on the screen. A river channel built by the Army Corps is too small and needs to be enlarged.
Mm-hmm.
When me and John were talking about this, it took us a while to sort of identify what sort of function would be trying to be achieved, because obviously, the channel by itself is not too small. The reason why it would need to be wider is because we're using that channel width for something.
Right.
So there's all sorts of different ideas that we came up with, from irrigation to, if they're creating a dam downstream or transporting goods by boat. All of these providing water as drinking water. There's just so many different functions that could be trying to be accomplished here that it was pretty difficult to try to narrow it down.
It is. After you practice this more, and if you, I don't know if you took a look at the taxonomy, but the taxonomy was included as part of the homework as sort of a cheat sheet, and that can, if you get stuck, looking at that taxonomy can sometimes get your wheels turning and give you some ideas. So an answer that I came up with for number 4 was, how does nature manage water? How does nature manage fluids, if you want to be even more general? But there's many right answers. There's some may be more relevant than others, but there's lots of ways to approach this. So thanks for that reaction, Elliot. Any other reactions or comments?
Well, this is Tom Quinn. On number 4, I kind of, my mind harkened back to the history of the Corps of Engineers. I was thinking flood control when I read this, preventing damage from flooding. That just occurred to me in terms of function. I guess maybe I'm trapped in that old mindset of what the Corps of Engineers does, or used to do.
Yeah, well, these are good things to work through, and the more you practice, the more you can kind of hone down or zero in on some even more basic functions. Because if you're too specific, if you say, I want to control flooding in Colorado, or I want to control flooding in over 50 acres or something, you can limit your solutions. But if you could say something more general, like, how does nature manage fluids or manage water or control flow? Your solution, you might have solutions appear in your research that you wouldn't have come across otherwise. So it's this is good practice.
Yes.
So we've just maybe how flowers spreading their DNA via seed dispersal. You might say something like, how does nature distribute materials? How does nature replicate or reproduce? You might, our county wants to recycle building materials. That might be something distilling it down to something basic like recycle materials, reduce waste. And you might, trying to be a little more general on these can really open up some of your potential solutions. So I'm going to move on to the climate change team. We got, looks like Elliot and Jonathan were able to meet, and they submitted this slide. And I let me see. Sorry, I can't easily see who's here at the same time as I'm presenting. So I'm just checking to see if Elliot. Well, Elliot, you're on, and I was just checking to see if Jonathan's on too. I know there are a couple members of your team from the Fort Belknap reservation on the Assiniboine and Gravant and Assiniboine tribes. And Ina, Sean, and Liz are really interested in working on this. So maybe we can come up with some time to meet as a group and kind of get them up to speed with your thinking. So.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. We tried to schedule a few times, and people weren't responsive, so we just went ahead.
No, that's what you need to do sometimes. So I'm glad you proceeded, but maybe we can kind of we can catch them up a little bit. So I guess I would say here with what you've got, it's you're off to a really great start. And this is advice I would give to all the teams. The more you can focus on a more specific function, or a geographic area, and have something more concrete in mind, the easier it'll be to go to biology and come up with some strategies that might work. If you're too general, sometimes it's just hard to keep that focus. But by being a little more specific, like saying how might nature adapted climate change if you are using Fort Belknap as your geographic area in the northern plains, or specifically on the Fort Belknap Reservation, and then you have that specific context in mind. So a good, you're off to a great start.
All right, thank you. Yeah, we tried to keep it general because we didn't know much about the reservation. So
right. No, you're thinking you're on the right track, certainly. And if we can get you all together, I think they'll be able to help you with some of those specific challenges. Team Communicate submitted this, and they took a little different approach here. They did a mind map, which is great. Nature does all these things. Nature protects its young, educates, shares information, gathers information. So we could spend the next hour talking, or more, probably talking about the way humans share information or communicate similarly or differently, and the advantages of the different approaches. So that is, you guys are off to a great start. And then also submitted this slide. And so the same comment here, I guess, would be try to focus on maybe a particular age group or a scenario, like maybe you want to educate fifth graders in school about environmental issues, or how would you communicate that information, or maybe teaching responsibility to adolescents, because nature does have juveniles and adolescents too. So so just trying to maybe think of a more specific scenario might help focus your research as well. Would anyone from Team Communicate like to share some thoughts? Okay. We also heard from Team Lifeblood, which is the water team, because water is the blood of life, or is our lifeblood. And Peter and Wendy were able to meet, and they were also able to meet with Mike Durglow, who's the environmental director for the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes. We were thinking that this challenge could focus on the Flathead Reservation, and Mike and Whisper Means are willing to help kind of serve as, at least as advisors for this team. So I think you're off to a good start. So let's continue to talk and refine your challenge.
Diana, do you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, hey, this is Tim. Yeah, Kendra was trying to talk, but I guess her microphone was not working.
Oh, okay.
For Team Communicate, and that can happen with how this is set up, I think.
Oh, I think now too. It's hard for me.
So maybe she can, type some ideas in the chat. I don't know.
Sure. Yeah, that's fine. Kendra, if you want, it's just hard. It's hard for me to see all this and my screen and the chat and the attendees. But yeah, it's Kendra, if you wanna. Okay, okay. So she's gonna set up her phone. So we'll continue. Let's see. So the Disturbandits also submitted this slide, and looking the challenge, how does nature manage disturbance? And again, the same comment really, the more you can maybe focus on perhaps a specific kind of disturbance in a specific geographic area will probably help you focus your research. Anyone from the Disturbandits want to comment on your process?
Yes, this is Tom. We had a conference call last week, and we were having a little bit of trouble narrowing down our focus because the area of disturbance is so broad. So we have flooding, fire, and drought, and so a lot of our discussion centered around that. Were we going to try to narrow our focus or cover all three of those areas? And I think what we're going to have to do is focus on one, because it's going to be difficult to address all three of them. But we're going to be meeting again to talk about that a little bit more. So I think what we have in there in terms of, and I'm sorry, I was trying to take notes at the same time. I think I bounced myself out of the meeting temporarily. Oh, there we go. Oh, am I still on?
Yeah, we can still hear you.
Oh, okay. Can we go back to the last slide?
Sure.
Okay. So the challenge being, how does nature manage disturbance? And under function, nature's resilience despite human destruction, alteration of natural ecosystems. And I think in terms of any of the areas, flood, drought, or fire, really you're looking at the same or very similar things in terms of function. And I'm kind of biased right at this point with floods, because in Colorado we are inundated with water.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so we really need to talk again. And I know probably I didn't refine. I was given responsibility for creating the slide, and I think I needed to refine this a little bit more. But right now I'm kind of living this laboratory. I'm getting to observe how human alteration of ecosystems creates very significant disturbance, because we have a reservoir in Lakewood that was created for flood control, and it's serving that purpose, but it's also backing up and completely flooding, inundating ecosystems that have formed behind the dam. So for us right now, it's really kind of an unprecedented opportunity to watch this temporary destruction, if you will, so caused as a result of the alteration of natural ecosystems. Naturally, that water would all go on downstream and flood the valley below. It would spread out and flood the valley below, but instead it's backed up, destroying everything behind it, essentially. And so it's kind of a living laboratory right at the moment. I'm sad to say, because it's, a lot of the trees are probably not going to survive this round of flooding. So anyway, that's just kind of where I was coming from. But clearly we need to figure out which of those areas we're going to focus on. And I guess one other question was, if we're looking at, when we do the field work up in Montana, are we going to be looking at a specific area up there that we should have our focus on?
We're going to be meeting, our in-person session will be on the northern edge of the Yellowstone ecosystem, but you can focus anywhere you want as a team. I think the example I've given is, when I went through this workshop, we focused on the Grand Canyon. Our in-person session was in the Great Sand Dunes National Park, so it was different, still very valuable, just learning about different ecosystems and different strategies. So you can find strategies from an organism that might live somewhere else, but it might be dealing with a similar problem or challenge that can be applied to your particular challenge, even if it's in a different geographic area. So I actually have a lot to cover, so I think maybe we should move on. But it's really helpful to hear kind of how the teams are, moving through this. This is challenging. You are stretching, which is good. I think it's good to be stretched, and biomimicry is really a new way of thinking and full methodology. So if you're frustrated, just hang in there, because it gets easier, and it's really a potential paradigm shifter. So the next thing I wanted to talk about a little bit was iSites, and just I hope you're all able to continue with your iSite practice, it's a nice way to slow down, observe, and not be in a hurry, which is oftentimes in our busy lives something that's rare. So these are just some photos from my backyard. Spring has sprung in Montana. We've got Monarda and alyssum, lamb's ears, dandelions, as my friend Prashant from India would say. He didn't realize they were pronounced dandelion, and I think dandelion is a much more elegant way to say dandelion. So would anyone like to share, just take a minute and share some of what they're seeing in their iSite? Or Jane, I know you gave a little talk last night on biomimicry. Maybe you'd like to share that experience.
Okay, yeah, I can. Yeah, I'll share that. I'm taking a course a Master Naturalist course in Arlington, Virginia. One of our classmates, Martin, used to be the president, I believe, of the Arlington Master Naturalist group. You can correct me if I'm wrong. But so part of the training is that we each give 5-minute presentations at some point before we finish the course. So as I've been learning about biomimicry and then what I've been learning in the Master Naturalist course, field trips and lectures, I've been more tuned into how some of the speakers are referring to, say, when they're talking about stormwater management and other issues, how they've been using the term mimicking nature, or just even just in the presentations about different about natural history or the organisms, just picking up on some of the areas that I wonder about biomimicry. So I decided to do my 5-minute presentation on this topic, learning from nature, and drew from the Janine Benyus's book, and was able to apply some of the things I'm learning so far in this course and through the materials, but also applying the questions about what would nature do in a situation, and trying to translate that into what I saw, what we've been learning in the discussions about stream restoration and impacts of land use on nature. So what was great about it, I just want to know, this was during in between a 3-hour lecture on forestry and forest management practice, and what was great was that the speaker hadn't really thought about biomimicry, but he obviously was using it in his work, and he even had the term "what would Mother Nature do" in his presentation. So when I had the questions, "what would nature do?" it was really it was great. It resonated. So the second half of the whole course, he really incorporated biomimicry into his talk. It was just a very exciting thing for me, and I think it was somewhat new for some people, but was a good way to sort of bring it into what I'm learning in the Master Naturalist program.
Oh, that's excellent. Thank you. And you're already using this. This is great. And I think many of you will have a similar experience as you talk to people. People working in restoration ecology, or people doing some sort of watershed management, or many other fields too. But they're already doing this. They're already looking at natural models that work. They're trying to replicate that. They're looking for reference reaches on rivers, and they may not call it biomimicry, but it's really what they're doing. And by introducing the terminology and some of the process, that mimicking that they're already doing can go deeper. Sometimes it can be a more conscious effort. They might be able to find solutions that they might otherwise not have considered if they were just thinking about flood control versus how do I create a flexible floodplain. So great. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm going to move on. I'm just looking at the clock here. So the essential elements are the ethos, the reconnect. So the ethos is certainly the ethics. The reconnect is our natural biophilia, as E.O. Wilson termed it, our natural affinity for life. And then emulate is what we're going to talk about more today, and that is the intent to proceed in a more appropriate way on this planet, and using nature as model, mentor, and measure. So we'll talk about that as we move through the methodology. And for those of you who may be saying, I'm not a designer, I don't design anything, I would say you are. I would say we are all designers. We design our day, we design our meals, we plan vacations. Some of us, if we work in a product development or industry, we might design new formulations for soap or cleaners. Some of us, using the floodplain example, some of us may design a new river channel or maybe design a new park. So whether or not it's part of our job or not, I would argue that we're all designers. So the part here, this is where biomimicry is really different from a traditional design process where you might have the terms vary from industry to industry, but generally it's like a scoping, a creating, and an evaluating phase. And we insert biological strategies here through the discovering phase. And this is the emulation. So we call it integrating biology into the traditional design process, and we're discovering nature's strategies for solving particular problems. So we might look at it like this, in little circles, scoping, creating, and evaluating, with discovering the life strategies and adaptations in the center and feeding into each of these phases. But there's not, this is not a linear process at all. In fact, it probably looks more like this. We might identify the function in scoping. We might think it's really clear, but then as we go through the research, we might want to go back and we might discover some models that might help us rethink our function a little bit and make it tighter. So we'll go back, might evaluate, might go back to discovery and saying, it's not really working. Are there other models we could use? So we might say, for example, how does nature move fluids? And so that would be our question. And we would go discover some strategies for that. We might say, well, trees move fluids. They take the water from the ground, they move it up through their xylem tubes, up to the leaves where they can conduct photosynthesis and transpire. So they're using capillary action. Okay, so that's one model. What's another strategy? Well, other ways that nature moves fluids is leaves in the tropics. They have drip tips, and those tips funnel water off the surface more quickly, which can help, if it's a humid, wet tropics, it helps protect them against mold and decay and helps the plant resist rot. Okay, well, those are two strategies of nature. Maybe they're closely aligned to what the function you're trying to solve for, or maybe not. And if not, keep discovering. And in practice, you might actually want to come up with a few dozen models and see, and then from this kind of wide net, narrow down the ones that you think best align with what you're trying to do. Because the function is all about what you want your design to do. So here is the design process as the Biomimicry 3.8 has, when the Biomimicry Institute have put this together, and we're going to walk through each of these phases. Beginning with scoping. So we talked about this last month, what would nature do? And it's good to define the context, which you've been doing. You've been working to identify the function. And then we haven't talked so much about life's principles. That's the subject of the next lecture, or of the July lecture, actually. So we'll be coming to that. We're trying to lay the foundation a little bit before we get to that. But here we're really saying, what is it that we really want to do? And so that's our functional need. Then we need to ask why many times. I think the example we gave last month was, I want a light bulb. Well, why do you want a light bulb? And that's a noun. We want a verb, because a verb, if you say, I want to illuminate, there are a lot of ways to answer that question, and maybe very few ways to say, how would you design a light bulb? And then the context, those are the operating conditions, the rules, any non-negotiables that you want to include. So how would nature, like if you're thinking of an owl hunting at night, so how would nature move through a fluid, which is your function, a fluid being air, silently, which is your adjective, because the context is the owl needs to be silent at night to catch prey. So just think of the function as the verb and the context as the adjectives. So as we get into scoping, we want to take these human needs and put them in terms that we can actually ask nature about. We can't really ask nature about a water tank, but we could ask about conserving water. We are probably going to ask nature about bleach, but we could ask about the absence of color or creating color. We wouldn't necessarily ask nature about pesticides specifically, although there are natural pesticides, but we might say, how would nature manage pests? We wouldn't ask nature about a bottle or a cup, but we might say, how does nature contain liquids? So lots of examples, but we need to kind of phrase it in a way that our biological research will be productive. Because organisms and ecosystems do face the same challenges that we do as humans. You know, here's an ant's bridge, and we span chasms and rivers all the time with our, you know, metaphorical or literal bridges. So I wanted to talk a little bit, I thought it might be helpful to use a specific example as we go through the discovering, creating, and evaluating phases. So I was recently working on a project, the Genius of the Congo. So it's in equatorial Africa. And as part of the scoping phase, we first identified our context. And Congo is a really large area. It's called the lungs of Africa. And we identified our operating conditions. It's hot, you know, 26 to 29 degrees Celsius pretty much year-round, humid, 80 to 90% humidity, completely the opposite. Raina, in Atlanta, you have a little more similar hot heat and humidity conditions, but those of us in the arid west have quite the opposite. Other operating conditions were flooding, standing water, high precipitation with a dry period, low light, and nutrient-poor soils. So that was our context. There are many other things we could have considered, but we focused just on these 6. And so as we go through, I'll give some examples from the Congo. So the first part of discovering is to discover these natural models, and we really want to bring the experts in, which is nature, and that helps us expand our solution space when we're trying to solve a human design challenge. And typically, humans want their function to perform quickly, but nature usually isn't in such a hurry. So we might look at, you know, leaves are recycled, but it's over a slow period. It takes quite a while in nature for leaves to actually decompose. So we might look at several organisms and take different aspects of different strategies from several organisms and combine them to solve our particular challenge. Oh, and then, you know, here's the taxonomy that I mentioned before. You know, if you are struggling to biologize your question, this can help with the terminology. Both the verb and the context, they should make sense when you frame it in the how would nature blank. You can also ask, what would nature not do? And that sometimes asking the negative can be as informative. So would nature really build dams to control flooding, or how would nature manage excess water? So just really different ways of looking at a problem. So how do you go about discovering? Well, what do you already know? All of you are smart people. You probably know more than you think. If you are interested in a particular context, you might, if you're able to go to a similar place, you might just go outside and observe what is operating, what organisms exist there, what animals, what insects, what plants. What can you observe? Google is a great resource, and Google Scholar kind of points you to more scientific and research articles. You can do literature searches, either primary or even secondary literature can be helpful. You can, for those of you who are at a university or have access to people at universities, you can ask them. Even high school science teachers can be helpful. You can go to a nature center. There's a lot of resources out there. And then a special one that is set up just for this kind of research, and we're populating it all the time, trying to add to, you know, the 30 million experts out there in nature, we can try to tap them and apply their strategies into this database. So you can go to the Ask Nature website, which is asknature.org, and search by function. How does nature, and fill in the blank. Optimized position is this screenshot I've got here. But play with it. Let me know what you think, and just have fun with it. So those are some ideas about how to go about discovering. So going back to my Congo example, one thing that we did I was on a team of 4, and we found it useful to identify the operating conditions, and then as we were coming up with our organisms, we just developed a spreadsheet and described the mechanism, and then put the research articles there. To you can use Evernote or whatever works for you, but it's good to start trying to focus and compile your research in one place. And so we went wide, and then we narrowed it down and found what we called, we thought were really champion adapters, like the raffia palm thrives in standing water and flood conditions, which is a really kind of a unique property to be. Often plants will, literally drown, the roots will drown in standing water, but raffia palm is a champion adapter to those operating conditions. So once we discover these natural models, then we need to abstract those biological strategies. We need to take that strategy and bring out the design principles. And there's lots of different ways to do this. For example, like the ponderosa pine, it survives in harsh, arid, cold, sometimes windy, sometimes, pretty dry slopes. So what are its strategies for dealing with those conditions? And, well, it manages moisture loss. How does it do that? Well, it has waxy needles and thick bark. So you might abstract that design principle to be a waterproof outer coating minimizes fluid loss, or thick covering insulates from temperature extremes. Anyway, so this isn't easy at all. It definitely takes practice. But if you want non-biologists to understand the biological strategies, and for those of you who aren't biologists, if you want to understand the strategies, it's important to be able to translate this a little bit into non-biological terms. So you might want to say maintain a clean surface, reduce drag for improving fuel efficiency. But there's lots of benefits of discovering these natural models. You can find innovative solutions. These are sustainable strategies because they're time-tested and they exist in nature. So we incorporate biology into the design, and this is our emulating. We move from creating, the discovering into the creating phase. So here in creating, we brainstorm these bio-inspired ideas, and this can be really pretty fun. So you come up with these basic design principles, and then we're really trying to maximize the ideas in our solution sets. And so we can just try to think of anything that you think might work, or might be ways you could apply these particular strategies to your challenge. You might, if you're in business, you might be looking at communication systems, feedback loops, ways to distribute or exchange goods. And you're not going to think of everything, but using the bio-brainstorm approach and looking at natural models can help you expand that solution space and come up with some design principles that you can then apply to your challenge. And so we can look at, the termite mound as inspiration for a building in Africa, which uses 10% of the energy of a similar sized building. We can look at the inspiration of the humpback whale and apply that to reducing drag and create more fuel efficient or more efficiently functioning fans. We can look at photosynthesis and how we can create solar panels that function more like leaves. So lots of ideas from nature, and then I think there's endless possibilities out there in how we can apply them. So we might look at how does nature collect water. So for the water team, bromeliads are a really great example. So bromeliads grow in tropical rainforests, and they actually create their own ecosystem. So you can apply the form of the bromeliad to collect water, the shape of those leaves and the basin at the that's contained at the base of the bromelia and that basal rosette. You can look at the process of collecting the water, and as they collect the water and birds come and will defecate into the bromeliad, there'll be nutrients, and then you start to have small organisms living, and so not only is it the form or the process, it's also the function of, you can have the function of an ecosystem. So it's, you can take design principles from this, from bromeliads. How would nature hold liquids? How would nature contain liquids? How would nature acquire nutrients? These grow high up in the trees. By creating this basin, they collect their own nutrients. How might nature speed decomposition? You could also apply this to controlling flooding. How do you manage water through maybe many of these sort of retention basins? So lots of different ways to apply this. So an example from this project I was just working on in the Congo. So here we have a dragonfly that actually tips its body to regulate heat. And so what we did is we looked at the biology, we came up with some life principles and some functions, which you see off to the right, and then we described the mechanism, the biological mechanism that this dragonfly uses to adapt to these constant warm temperatures when it needs to maintain its optimum body temperature. And from that, we came up with some design principles and some application ideas. And so the design principle, we try to take the biology out and then sketch it or draw it in a way that would make sense to a non-biologist. So we're trying to, get the engineer to understand this, get the business person to understand this, or whatever the discipline. And then we just kind of brainstorm some possible application ideas. Another example from the Congo project is high species diversity. So same sort of approach, differentiate to niche. So niches in ecology are specific roles, or that can be either in time or place or diet, different ways to kind of focus in on a particular small part of that ecosystem, and it's your specialty. And so we came up with a biological mechanism, and then we abstracted that to a design principle. So we removed the biology, drew it in a way that you can kind of imagine that this is still the forest, but it took the biology out and talks about critical resource inputs. And in the tropics, they're really, unlike most of the places where we live, since it's abundant warm temperatures and water, there are very few limiting factors. There's no freeze, there's no winter. So we know we live in a finite world, but in the tropics, growth really does proceed year-round. And then we brainstormed some application ideas, everything from urban planning to businesses to an education platform, such as Montessori. So with that, I'm going to quickly move on to the evaluating phase. And so evaluating is really, we're using nature's checklist, and the life's principles are kind of our design specifications and our evaluation criteria. So we'll talk a little bit about this. And the earlier you can incorporate the nature's design principles into your project, like if you can incorporate them in the scoping phase, so we want to design something that goes fast, uses readily available materials, and is life-friendly. What if "and is life-friendly" were added to the design of our products, our shampoos or our upholstery or our, plastic or our containers for food? What if it that was a design criteria, how different might our world look? I mean, the example I often think about is we have yogurt containers that are made of plastic that will last in our landfills for, 100 years, maybe longer. Yet the product it contained I'd be lucky to have it not go moldy sitting on my kitchen counter for more than 3 or 4 days without refrigeration. So, it seems a little out of whack. The container will greatly outlive what it's holding. So what if one of our design criteria were it must be life friendly? So we'll talk about evaluating. So it's a way to it's an innovative way to look at whether or not a project is really appropriate, and it can hold us to a higher standard. We're trying to create life-friendly products using life-friendly conditions. So an example, this is for those of you who work at EPA or have been to the EPA Region 8 building in Denver, the Gold LEED certified building, and you can design buildings, but the story I've heard is that they were putting in the HVAC system for this building, and it was a super efficient, the highest quality and highest standard HVAC system for this Gold LEED certification. But what they hadn't thought about was, this is the arid West, and this HVAC system isn't going to function properly under those operating conditions. So they, as part of the evaluation, which is key to any project, you need to go back and evaluate, they caught that and ended up redesigning the HVAC system so it would function within the operating conditions of the arid Mountain West. So it's really important, even if you're going for LEED, and I know Wendy and maybe some others of you have that background. So it's important to think about your operating conditions as well in design any project.
Yeah, the building is also a double L construction, and it has 2 entirely separate HVAC systems, so it's basically 2 buildings. Kind of cool. So the north one, needs much less cooling, opposite of the south half of the building. Mm-hmm. It's pretty clever how they designed it. And the north half is 10 feet higher to block the brutal winds and all kinds of interesting features in the building.
Yeah, and that's being, one of the life's principles is being locally attuned and responsive. And that's an example of thinking about the place, thinking about the building orientation, thinking about the setting, and incorporating those to make the building function, optimally. And for the comfort of the individuals and for this, to save energy, it's smart. But it's, any of us can look out our window and see examples of how, with just a little more thought, things could have been so much better. So the biomimicry thinking process can really bring that thoughtful consideration, I think, into our designs.
Yeah, and the architect is from Portland, and he was out sailing on the Columbia River, and he was just trying to figure out how to get light, natural light to penetrate all the way down to the ground, because it's a very tall, narrow atrium. And he was just out sailing one day and was like, oh my God, of course, sails. He came up with these Teflon-coated sails, and he brought the Seattle Daylighting Lab out here to test, and sure enough, after they put in the sails, there was 22% more light hitting ground level.
See, the opportunities for inspiration are all around us. We just need to have our eyes open.
Just go sailing or something.
Oh, right. I'll next week I'll talk about mollusks and give another example. I don't have time today, but it fits right in with your comments, Tim. So here is the design process. It might go like this, but it most likely goes something like this. And you do this process as you need to, depending on what your challenge is, and we should ask, in evaluating a particular project. So, how must this design function here? This is not Portland. This is not a river. This is an upland meadow, And so how would we define success here? And so we could, I would argue that we could use life's principles as those evaluation criteria, because these are time-tested. I mean, we could even look at them as pre-tested solutions, because if these strategies didn't work, these species would have gone extinct. So something about the way prairies function or coneflowers function in these habitats, what is it that works, and what can we learn? Because we too, as humans, should be conscious of living under these same operating conditions. So the life's principles, which we will get to in the webinar in July. Here's kind of a teaser, I guess, of what those life's principles are. There's actually 26. These are the main headings, and then underneath those headings are some other strategies that seem to be common to successful adaptations on Earth. And so Janine Benyus, who wrote the book Biomimicry Innovation Inspired by Nature, so it has this great quote: after 3.8 billion years, so this is a massive R&D program, research and development program, nature has learned what works, what's appropriate, and what lasts. So we can certainly use that and learn from it. And so we can use these life's principles as a checklist. Is it resource efficient? Can it adapt to those changing conditions? Are we trying to, as we talked in the first lecture about, are we trying to hold the ball still, like build even more beef up flood control or channelization walls to keep the stream stable and still and straight, or are we able to adapt to changing conditions and allow that stream during higher flows to flow out of its banks without doing damage? Are we integrating development and growth? Are we, as we grow, are we supporting our structures? We can apply this really quite easily, metaphorically, to education or organizational development. As your business grows, are you supporting your people? Is it locally attuned and responsive? The example at the Region 8 building is a good one. Do we want windows on the north side? Do we want them on, maybe we want them on the south side for solar gain? And then using life-friendly chemistry. Well, of course, the life does not use the entire periodic table, does not use all the elements. We as humans tend to use as many as possible, but life does a lot with just, about a dozen. So just looking at the time, I've got two quick case studies. This is the Baleen Filters. It's a company inspired by the baleen whale. A researcher in southeastern Australia was concerned about how do we remove particulates from fluids. And this is something that wastewater treatment operators and others who deal with waste streams deal with all the time, and particularly oils and greases and hairs and lint. Those are like really super nasty to remove, difficult, very challenging. And then we have different volumes of materials, sometimes different concentrations of particulates that need to be removed. And so he thought, well, shoot, how does a baleen whale feed? And what they do is they dive down, and as in the process of feeding, they bring in all this ocean water, which is filled with krill, their main food source, krill and plankton. And then they strain the water back out, because can't have all that water. They don't want the water, they just want the krill. So they use the baleen, which is a modified whale bone, and they strain the water out, keeping the krill. Well, if the krill just stayed on the baleen filter, their modified whale bone, it would plug up. So they use their tongue to clean it. So he was inspired by this process, and then he came up with the Baleen filter, which is basically an inline particulate removal system that's scalable, to handles different volumes, different levels of concentrations of contaminants, and then it has a sweeping mechanism to keep it clean. So there's very little downtime, and these are sold all over the world, and it's just a really brilliant way to have a scalable particulate removal system, and inspired by the baleen whale. Another quick case study here is was inspired by the by how birds see. Birds see ultraviolet light, and many of you may know that UV wavelengths in so they're visible to birds, but every year, like 100 million birds die every year just in the U.S. alone. And so it's a big problem because they fly right into plate glass windows, and because they don't know about windows and they think that it's a flight path. So what this company did is they put together or embedded plate glass with these UV visible strands. So the bird doesn't see an open flight path anymore. It sees this barrier. And by doing this, they were able to reduce bird collisions in the tests 76% by 76%. And it's just by working with thinking about how birds see and trying to solve this human problem. And so the company is called Arnold Glass, and the product is called Orna Lux. So Orna as in bird, Lux. And I need to confirm this, but I've heard that this is, you get extra points in the LEED scoring if you're using this bird-friendly glass. And then just briefly, what if we thought differently about how we design our cities? How would nature design a city? So HOK, the architecture and engineering firm, actually participated in the Future Cities competition. This is their vision of how the city of Atlanta, so Raina, your city could look like this in 2108. So it's a vision of the future. And, by asking what would nature not do? Would nature create massive heat sinks or heat islands, tons of, literally millions and billions of tons of concrete and impervious surfaces? Would nature do that? So if not, what might nature do? So it can help us rethink our cities. So I'm got just a couple minutes here. I want to tell you, so we've got a venue for our in-person session in it'll be, it's actually between Livingston and Bozeman, Montana. It's on the northern edge of the Yellowstone ecosystem. This sleeps 14, and there's camping and a teepee. So I know not everyone will probably be able to make it, but we'd love for as many people as possible to attend. We will cover the cost of the lodging, and then just ask that everyone contribute probably about $100. Maybe it might be a little bit less for meals during the in-person session. So the idea is that we'd arrive on the afternoon of the 9th. We'd spend the 10th, 11th, and 12th together, and then we'd have a closing circle and leave on the morning of the 13th. So that's the plan. We'll have more information coming, and we can try and set up some carpooling arrangements so folks flying in or driving can coordinate, and we can minimize traffic. And then here is the homework. I'll be giving this material to Mila for posting on the newly revamped MSC website. I've got a challenge to biology worksheet, so you have started the scoping, and this worksheet is, it can be confusing. So feel free to call or ask, call me or Marie, and if you're having problems figuring out how to get started. I'm a biologist, not a designer, so it was a little, the format was a little tricky, I thought, but I figured it out, and I know you can too. And so as part of your homework, we'd like you to, as a team, write a paragraph of the process so far and what it's like, what the challenges have been, just a short paragraph, and then be prepared to have someone on your team share it during the next webinar. I invite you to check out Ask Nature to start your discovering process as you look for strategies to address your challenge. Continue your iSite practice, and then there's this 4-minute YouTube video called The Evolution of the Butterfly, which I think you'll enjoy. If you haven't, it's been around for a couple of years. I think it came out in 2012. It's with Bruce Lipton. So go outside, be inspired, and then this is an opportunity to work with your team and learn about other disciplines. So our next webinar will be Wednesday, June 17th, and our homework is due on the 14th. So thank you. Are there any questions? I'm sorry, I went right to the end, but are there any questions before we close? I can stay on for a little bit.
Hi, this is Kendra.
Hi, Kendra.
Hey there.
Nice to have
you. Connected. Well, one thing, I guess kind of a question, but also a little review of what our group did is, so we're working with how to communicate, how does nature communicate, and so the two contexts that we have sort of identified is education and then also potentially looking at us as a group as a context. Since we've been struggling so much determining how to communicate, it seemed like it could be a good case study for creating tools and techniques to do that sort of thing better, just for a small group of people to get together and solve a problem. Is that a specific enough context or challenge to work within?
Yeah, that's certainly fine. Something that it's a challenge that we all face as we do more and more work virtually. How do you coordinate this, small group of busy people in different places? And, how might nature do that? How might nature share information? What kind of signaling? What kind of information distribution patterns? So yeah, you could certainly approach it that way.
Cool, thank you.
And especially if you're feeling the pain, you'll probably be really accurate with your description. Any other thoughts?
I had one other question if somebody else.
Okay.
We've been talking a lot about biology and looking to the biological side of nature for solutions, but can this go beyond the biology side into chemistry and thermodynamics, mechanisms of nature to seek solutions, to see how those things can fit into the systems that we're creating?
Yes, you can. It's not, I guess when we say biology, we aren't. It's not limited to what you might cover in a biology class in college. It's basically life strategies. It's called biomimicry, but bio is life. So if you are thinking about what are the physics of transporting fluids or moving through air, so yeah, you can use thermodynamics and chemistry certainly. We want life-friendly chemistry. So yeah, it's not limited strictly to the discipline of biology. Good question.
Cool. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Well, if there are, we're over time, and I want to respect people's schedules. Thank you for sharing so much at the beginning. And hang in there. It's a new way of thinking, and it can stretch you a little bit. But I think you'll like the way you're stretched. As I mentioned, I took this workshop in 2012 and just saw so much incredible application that I'll be done with this master's program in actually just about 6 months. So it's a really, I found it a super rewarding way to look at the world, and has just opened my eyes to so many things. So.
And those slides are so beautiful. They're amazing. Are they available anywhere?
They are available on my computer.
Okay.
But if you are wanting to do presentations, I'd be happy to share them. So.
Yeah, they're just lots of great ideas and the pictures to go with them. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let me know if you have something that you're
definitely.
If you want to give talks or share this with others. Just send me an email or give me a call, and I'd be happy to talk with you more.
Yeah, righty. Cool.
Righty.
Thanks, Diana.
Yeah, and thanks everybody, and we'll talk in June, if not before.
Thanks, Diana. Bye.
Thank you.
Diana.
Yep.